Hello, and welcome back to the HearTOGETHER podcast from the Philadelphia Orchestra. I'm your host, Tori Marchiony, and this is a space to hear from the artists and activists working to build a more equitable world, inside and outside the concert hall. You just heard a bit of Out of Season from the 2015 release, A Series of Strange Narratives, composed and performed by our guest today, the Honourable Elizabeth A. Baker.
I tell people it's like a Tribe Called Quest. You say the whole thing each time, the Honourable Elizabeth A. Baker.
The Honourable Elizabeth A. Baker calls herself a new Renaissance artist, a term both vague and descriptive enough to contain the vast diversity of her constantly evolving practice. Growing up in St. Petersburg, Florida in the 1990s, her mother encouraged creative exploration in myriad forms: dance, acting, photography, music, poetry, to name just a few. In college, she studied classical guitar, voice, piano, cello, and audio engineering. After that, she refused the cultural mandate to, quote-unquote, pick a lane.
Most people they don't really care about big name opportunities and things like that. I just want to make work and make work for myself. And if people like it, awesome. If they don't like it, even more awesome, because I've made them feel something viscerally that they're going to have a dialogue about. I actually like when people walk out of my concerts, I'm like, yes, they felt something so severe. They had to get up and leave. I'm like, yeah, I got you. You're going to go home and you're going to be like, this was horrible. And you're going to tell people, and then they're going to have a whole dialogue about the whole thing. And that's what art's all about.
In 2016, she founded the Florida International Toy Piano Festival and released 2 books, Musings of a Young Composer and Toyager, which has become the definitive text on toy piano. 2018 brought Quadrivium, a double-disc digital release of minimalist solo piano compositions, avant-garde prepared piano improvisations, meditative new age tracks, spoken word, and electronics. It was accompanied by a 16-page zine that included her poetry and art, as well as a manifesto condemning the narrow parameters in which much art is presented today. And when the Honourable Elizabeth A. Baker and I spoke in September 2021, she sat in front of a striking abstract painting of her own creation, part of a multimedia exploration on voids. The rest of her space was filled with boxes. She was packing up to move to Boston as a Radcliffe Fellow at Harvard. So, yes, there are many practical reasons the Honourable Elizabeth A. Baker calls herself a new Renaissance artist. But for her, self-definition is not only functional. It's a radical exercise of occupying her own identity and unapologetically claiming space.
I want to say 2017, around 2016, 2017, I was working extensively with dancers because I have a background in dance. So it's easy to have a person who is in sound, who also understands movers and is a mover themselves. And we were working with dance films a lot. And so there was it would have seemed like a very casual incident to most people, but it was a pivotal moment for me. And that was when the director introduced me to someone as, this is the composer of the film. And when this incident happened, I felt viscerally and physically like I had been put into a box and like I couldn't breathe. And so I sort of just took note, didn't really make a big deal out of it, but took note in my mind, like, this is not something we can do anymore. Because it feels disingenuous, and it feels like in that one word, I'm turning away from the many other things that I am. Most people would say, well, you're a multidisciplinary artist. And that also felt wrong because, a lot of these terms have built up meaning. There's expectations about what a composer is supposed to do and also what they're supposed to look like. And I didn't subscribe to that. And it just so happened that on Facebook, of all places, Laurie Anderson had an interview that I came across on Facebook. And she talked about how the biggest mistake young artists make is allowing themselves to be defined by a label for the purposes of marketing early on in their career that doesn't allow them to grow. And I was like, oh, like an adult who's more adult than me has solved the problem. So that's when I just started throwing ideas. And for some reason, new Renaissance artists just came to me. Renaissance because, there's a mentor of mine from college, Jeff Donovic, and he said one of the most true statements about me that anyone has ever said, which is, most people change their molecules every 7 years. Elizabeth changes her molecules every 7 months. And so that rebirth, and I've never been like other people that sort of find that groove of composition and then that's their signature style and then they stick to it. I absolutely hate that because I'm like, it becomes almost like an assembly process. And yeah, you can get famous doing that. But I'd like to challenge myself and create work that is not necessarily better, but that's a deeper exploration than the time before and in a different direction. So that's how I became a new Renaissance artist. And completely separate from that is the title, The Honourable Elizabeth A. Baker. And that comes because there's been this flurry of women composer, women festival, women this. And the optics of every single one of those opportunities, workshops, whatever, is white women. And then when I've been in those spaces, because you tend to be the only BIPOC human in that space, there's this weird tokenization or fetishization of oh, you're here. And then when there's an issue, an ultimately racist issue, because racist microaggressions happen all the time in new music, you either shut down because you don't have the energy to deal with it, or you're looked to as the person who must solve this problem and speak for all non-white people. And so it just felt like the definition of woman, and even beyond the new music community, if you go to Instagram, you go look at the mommy blogs and stuff like that, it's all white women. It's very whitewashed. And so everything about womanhood felt like it was stolen from me. I could never live up to that because I don't look like a white woman on Instagram. And so, I am a cisgender female. And so how am I going to reclaim my power and my femininity? Well, I'm going to, just like I did with new Renaissance artists, I'm going to give it my own title. And some people have pushed against it because they're like, that's only for judges. And I'm like, Prince was a symbol for several years and none of y'all questioned it. Now, just because, I come off as a Black woman, even though I do have a Latina heritage as well as an Asian heritage, so I'm multiply mixed. But, anytime a Black woman says something like, hey, I'd like to be respected, the world tends to be like, yeah, no, but you're not human. So we're just not going to allow you to do that. And I also chose the Honourable Elizabeth A. Baker because it requires white people to put respect on my name. Words are powerful. When you start saying positive things about yourself, you believe those things. When you force other people to say positive things about you, they start to believe those things. They start to see you as a person instead of a machine or a tool for a diversity platform. And there's a whole part of my practice that it was very influenced by the Nap Bishop and the Nap ministry, that Black people are constantly 100% tools of capitalism that are told that if you don't work 10 times harder, the white people will not respect you. And if you don't have that respect, then you mean nothing. So to rest as any person of color, but particularly as Black people in America, is like one of the most revolutionary things that you can do.
How have your experiences been with institutional leadership in the US versus abroad? Because I know that some of your films have been shown in the UK and Nigeria. Was there a profound difference in those experiences, or kind of same?
I mean, those were done through like film festival submissions, so it was a totally different experience. It was pretty simple because there was already a system. But I am pretty clear with people when I'm like, I don't think this is going to work out from the jump. So I don't always get myself into situations, though there have been situations that have been absolutely crazy ridiculous, especially during the pandemic and people's ideas of what is equitable for performers, putting themselves at risk. Even if they're vaccinated, you know, there's a Delta variant going around, and the Delta variant don't care about you, whether you've been vaccinated or not. I've seen a lot of that. Any performer should be able to walk off of a COVID performance at all, at like any time. Like if they feel unsafe for any reason, they should be able to walk off. And I feel like that's, you know, a provision that should exist somewhere. Unfortunately, we don't have unions and situations like that. So you end up in situations where you are advocating for yourself. And the danger in advocating for yourself against a group of people is that there are more people to spin the story to say that you're unprofessional. And most often when that sort of thing happens, it is a non-white person who's trying to finally stand up for themselves. And then a bunch of white people using white ideas of professionalism. And there's much speak among activists about whether our concept of professionalism is just another form of white supremacy trying to exist and push people down. So you have this danger that whenever you're a non-white person standing up for yourself and your mental health and your physical health in the midst of a global pandemic, which seems like a very realistic time to say, hey, I need to not be here. There's this thing of like, you've let everyone down. And it's like, no, I haven't let everyone down. The only person that matters in this equation is me. Because if I'm dead, did I let everyone else down too? So I've noticed that when we're dealing with stuff on a domestic level, that has been a glaring situation. And then there's also just the people do not want to pay Black artists for anything. And then, or if they pay them less than the other artists. And you just have to be aware of that. But yeah, there's a lot to learn. And I hope that, you know, I think that a lot of people are at the end of their rope, especially with the fourth wave happening. And there are more people saying, I'm not going to do that. And I kind of hope it continues, because that's the only way that organizations will learn that you cannot treat performers as just robots to get your stuff done. You have to think about the human side of the performer.
The Honourable Elizabeth A. Baker is a new music and equity advocate who defends the right of humans to their own humanity. At the same time, she's also keenly interested in decentering humans in general, believing that our obsession with hierarchy stands at the very heart of oppression of races and exploitation of perceived lower-order objects and organisms. One of her ongoing projects, Field Studies, is a series of outdoor audiovisual recordings in which the artist collaborates with the surrounding elements.
My goal in field studies is not to just go play music outside and be the center of attention in a space. And I think, like, if people go back and rewatch field studies pieces, they'll notice I'm not really performing to the camera. I'm doing stuff. The camera's there, but I'm not performing to the camera. I'm really listening to the space and trying to tap into the energy of the space and everything in the space and figure out where I belong in that space and not make it about me. And that really, for me, is, at least for now, probably one of the, it's really fulfilling for me. I really hate human narrative. We don't always investigate the reasons as to why we do things, whereas I'm always investigating the reasons as to why I do things, and I'm the intention behind it. And wanting to sort of escape into that comes from, unfortunately, because I've kind of always been the same way since I was a child. I was not well understood, and if you think about a child who's asking questions like, why do we have best friends? That seems weird because everyone brings something different to the table. When a child's asking that, like 5th grade, and maybe even possibly younger, I might have asked that, or might have had that conversation with my mom when I was like 4th grade. That's someone who, A, is dealing with a lot of trauma, but whatever, we're going to ice over that for a second. But that's also someone who's clearly aware that their voice doesn't matter. And my voice didn't matter even though I was intelligent and got good grades. It was a constant battle because I can tell you, I remember, being in like 1st or 2nd grade, I've always written very well. I've always had a good command of the English language. My mother is British, and the way she spoke to me was never in baby talk. It was always like I was an adult. We would listen to like talk radio, and my dad is an ex-professional football player who was a motivational speaker and owned his own business, very, very boring business, selling copiers, fax machines, and shredders. And so I had a very different childhood from other people, and my command of the English language and my ability to write and speak was like an adult from an early age. But in public school, in America, in the South, that doesn't make sense. And so I can tell you multiple times I got pulled into offices, principals' offices. There's no way you could have written this. This is not, you must have had somebody else write it for you. And then I would have to write in front of the principal and the teacher to prove that this was my own way of writing. I mean, and that's straight up systemic racism. We don't talk about it. But if you make a child do that enough, they start silencing their true selves. And I take an inordinate amount of time for somebody who works as a performer and other things to actually go to schools and interface with children, because I think that it's important for them to see that their view and experience of art is valid. Because, one of the many things I do when I work with students is we do sort of listening exercises. And depending on what their age is, you can draw or write, whatever this makes you feel and how you think it might have been made. And I told them there's no right or wrong answer. you know. And then when they start talking with each other about how they think something was made or what they think it was about, and I also don't have them make a story. There's always the make a story. No, just tell me, like, what does this make you feel? Sometimes guidance counselors get called because it's a good way to open up trauma in children. There was definitely one experience I had where I was at an elementary school that was not in a very safe neighborhood. And I was playing Indian harmonium for them. And all of a sudden, like, one child just started crying, and another child started crying. But this was not like a crying of like, oh, I don't like it crying. This was like they are clearly processing something, crying. And then I stopped because now, like, I'm not kidding, over half the class was crying. And I was like, nope. And so their guidance counselor like came to rescue me, and the kids would say, that sound reminded me of the one time when my uncle got shot and he died. And like, I was like, this is too much to process. But the guidance counselor was like, yes, we've had a breakthrough. Now we can have a grief counseling session. I'm like, that is great. And I'm so glad that this allowed the children to open up so that you could do the grief counseling session that they obviously need. But I was not prepared for that. So it's an unintentional music therapy, I guess, event. But it's always interesting to see, like, you know, I think everyone really underestimates the cognitive powers of children because those kids were about third grade.
That was an excerpt of Command Voices, a 2017 compositional series by the Honourable Elizabeth A. Baker, named for the intrusive voices that instruct patients experiencing psychosis to do destructive things or behave in a certain manner. But whether you knew the context or not, you probably felt something visceral when you heard it. And this ability to conjure physical sensation in listeners is one of her superpowers.
I have many friends that work as energy healers, or they are, shall we say, partial to the other side that most people have become blind to with age. And most of them say that what I do is pretty similar to it, even though I'm not really necessarily consciously being like, hey, let's go on an energy journey today. Did you have trauma to unpack? Let's unpack the trauma together. That's not really like, I mean, I'm glad when people have that happen. And because I think I'm not very, I'll have musicians that even work with me and they're like, oh, but is this your vision? And I'm like, are you experiencing things? Are you feeling like grounded with this? What are you feeling with this piece? And for a classically trained artist, it just flips it on their head for them. Because especially in the West, in the global North, there's this weird obsession with like Musical proficiency is being able to replicate something without mistakes. That's perfection. That's not the case in many other cultures, but that is certainly the case here. And for me, I think that the brain and its adaptability is a really beautiful thing. So a lot of my work I do as a performer deals a lot with improvisation. And there's things happening on stage that only recently I've started explaining to people, like the not process, which is that, especially with my electronics rigs, I always put something in there that could go catastrophically wrong. A piece of gear that's like not working properly, working with a patch where the volume level is like, you have just like a tiny little bit of playroom before, feedback could happen and the entire patch could crash. And so I like that. And I had a long conversation, actually probably several conversations. The good friend of mine who is a jazz pianist, but he also has a degree and experience in neuroscience. And we talked a lot about cellular memory and how when you're improvising, you have your things that you automatically sort of go to in specific situations. And you also have things from your ancestors in your cells that cause you to make certain choices in specific situations. And this goes back to my whole theory that I've said multiple times. There's no such thing as free improvisation because you're always pulling from known neural networks. And the only way would be if you had some weird amnesia but then still remembered how to play your instrument. And then I would still argue that it's a known neural network. Point is, how do you break out of a known neural network? You have to basically present a mountain lion, because that's the only time humans break from a known neural network is when a mountain lion is right in front of you. You have no context of what to do in that situation. And so you are really improvising. Like 100% free improvisation happens in that place. So by having something that can go catastrophically wrong at an unknown juncture, it breaks you out of that. We're going on the path, the normal path, and then the digital mountain lion appears and you now must solve things, but you must also solve things in front of other humans so that they don't know that there is a crisis happening on stage that you are troubleshooting.
That requires so much self-trust. And where did that come from?
Because I've always had a tie to energy and was very aware of it. So, most people that come into a music school or music industry, there's a lot of competition, a lot of backstabbing, a lot of Sherlocking. And that's a term that was created just for when Apple scoops up your app idea and is like, now it's in iOS. So there's a lot of that exists, and this from a very early time and very combatively in music school. I find people that they're so insecure about not having something that somebody else has that they make themselves miserable and they make everyone else around them miserable. And, with rejection and things like that, so many people, they get so caught up in rejection and they're like, it hurts so bad and I should have gotten. I'm like, no, what is meant to be yours will always be yours. And I definitely feel like my ancestors look out for me. I don't have the same fears that other people have, that I'm not going to get what I need. My father, ever the one for African proverbs, always like, if there is no fear within, the fear from outside can do you no harm. At some point in my life, that just made sense. He'd been telling me that for years and years and years. And I understood it at varying degrees. And I think in my 20s, my early 20s, or maybe even my teens, I really just didn't care what people think. And I don't really desire things that are not mine to have. And I release a lot of expectation and live in the beauty of like the moment. I granted have a ton of backup plans, where it's like, oh, if this goes wrong, we can solve it this way. That's anxiety. Superpowers. And yeah, I think that I would want everyone else in the world to really feel that freedom, because I'm not worried about what other people are doing, because I mind my own business. I really can throw myself into my own world of stuff, and I don't feel all of these extra unnecessary bad feelings because I feel like I haven't been given everything. I just feel, cool, we're here. We're experiencing the thing. And you don't have to capture that experience every time either, because every experience can be different. Humans love to capture things. And in particular, like modern humans love to sort of take something, put it in a box and look at it. And if you think about like a flower, and people are like, oh, I love flowers. And then they cut them and then they die. If you love something, you can leave it. If you truly love it, you can leave it and let it grow. But if you just want to own things, then you just go around collecting them and putting them on shelves.
Phew, what an awesome conversation with the Honourable Elizabeth A. Baker. Thank you so much for tuning in to the HearTOGETHER podcast from the Philadelphia Orchestra. I'm Tori Marchiony, and we'll be back next month with more conversations about music, social justice, and all the life in between. In the meantime, please also remember to subscribe, rate, review, and recommend to your friends. To play us out, I hope you'll enjoy this excerpt from the Honourable Elizabeth A. Baker's latest EP entitled Remain Calm. This is just a test.